Confessions 5. When your servant, Simplicianus, told me the story of Victorinus, I began to glow with fervour to imitate him. This, of course, was why Simplicianus had told it to me. He went on to say that under the Emperor Julian, a law had been passed to prohibit Christians from teaching literature and rhetoric. Victorinus had obeyed the law, preferring to give up his own school of words rather than desert your word, by which you make the lips of infants vocal with praise. In this he seemed to me not so much courageous as fortunate, because in this way he found the means of devoting himself entirely to you. I longed to do the same, but I was held fast, not in fetters clamped upon me by another, but by my own will, which had the strength of iron chains. The enemy held my will in his power, and from it he had made a chain and shackled me. For my will was perverse, and lust had grown from it. And when I gave in to lust, habit was born. And when I did not resist the habit, it became a necessity. These were the links which together formed what I have called my chain, and it held me fast in the duress of servitude. But the new will, which had come to life in me and made me wish to serve you freely and enjoy you, my God, who are our only certain joy, was not yet strong enough to overcome the old, hardened as it was by the passage of time. So these two wills within me, one old, one new, one the servant of the flesh, the other of the spirit, were in conflict, and between them they tore my soul apart. From my own experience, I now understood what I had read, that the impulses of nature and the impulses of the spirit are at war with one another. In this warfare, I was on both sides, but I took the part of that which I approved in myself, rather than the part of that which I disapproved. For my true self was no longer on the side of which I disapproved, since to a great extent I was now its reluctant victim rather than its willing tool. Yet it was by my own doing that habit had become so potent an enemy, because it was by my own will that I had reached the state in which I no longer wished to stay. Who can justly complain when just punishment overtakes the sinner? I could no longer claim that I had no clear perception of the truth, the excuse which I used to make to myself for postponing my renunciation of the world and my entry into your service, for by now I was quite certain of it. But I was still bound to earth and refused to serve in your army. Instead of fearing, as I ought, to be held back by all that encumbered me, I was frightened to be free of it. In fact, I bore the burden of the world as contentedly as one sometimes bears a heavy load of sleep. My thoughts, as I meditated upon you, were like the efforts of a man who tries to wake but cannot, and sinks back into the depths of slumber. No one wants to sleep forever, for everyone rightly agrees that it is better to be awake. Yet a man often staves off the effort to rouse himself when his body is leaden with inertia. He is glad to settle down once more, although it is against his better judgment, and it is already time he were up and about. In the same way, I was quite sure that it was better for me to give myself up to your love than to surrender to my own lust. But while I wanted to follow the first course and was convinced that it was right, I was still a slave to the pleasures of the second. I had no answer to make when you said, "Awake, you who sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light." You used all means to prove the truth of your words, and now that I was convinced that they were true, the only answers I could give were the drowsy words of an idler. Soon, presently, let me wait a little longer. But soon was not soon, and a little longer grew much longer. It was in vain that inwardly I applauded your disposition, when that other disposition in my lower self raised war against the disposition of my conscience, and handed me over as a captive to that disposition towards sin, which my lower self contained. For the rule of sin is the force of habit, by which the mind is swept along and held fast even against its will, yet deservedly, because it fell into the habit of its own accord. Pitiable creature that I was, who was to set me free from a nature thus doomed to death? Nothing else than the grace of God, through Jesus Christ our Lord.